Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 112 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I got Joe Meade with me, and tonight we are going over Week 7 in the Big Ten. A bunch of headlines. We have a coaching vacancy. We had a game between the top two of the top three teams, and we had a couple other games in the middle. And Joe, we're really starting to see how these tiers are shaking out. But let's get right into it. Friday night in Washington, the Huskies take down Rutgers 38-19. Another slow start for Washington. They fell down by double digits, but despite being down at halftime, they come out of the second half pretty strong. Damon Williams had a career game. Rutgers' defense showed no signs of stopping him, and Washington ends up winning pretty handily. But Joe, Rutgers looking to take the next step, still looking for their first Big Ten win. It didn't come here.
No, and I give a lot of credit to Jed Fish in Washington. I think overcoming that slow start was more inevitable than anything. I didn't really think Washington was going to be in danger of losing two straight home games after winning there 4 years in a row. Damon Williams is the story of this game, man. 21-27. He gets like 10 yards of rush, breaks that 40-yard long run, two TDs running, two TDs passing. Jonah Coleman adds in the last one. This is the exact Washington offense I projected all offseason, and I think was clicking at all cylinders after kind of that rut they had at the beginning of the game. I think defensively, there's very clear criticism. I think they're a little soft against the run. I know they gave up the 51-yarder, and then, but against their next few opponents, that's going to cost them, especially later into the year when they're possibly playing for college football playoff contention. I do think their defensive secondaries also regressed not regressed, but hasn't progressed as much as I would have liked it from last year. So I think there's clear defensive flaws for Washington, but I do think the offense is covering it up for now against these, let's call it what they are, these more inferior foes. That's not to discredit Washington. I'm just trying to call it like it is. I think Damon Williams is one of the better quarterbacks in this conference. I think him coming back next year, I think he's a top 3 QB in the conference for next year, barring any crazy transfers into the conference. And even Jonah Coleman, even though he only got that one TD and wasn't really a huge factor running the ball, I think he opens up so much for having to account for him, and then it allows Damon Williams to go off with all the receiving threats. So really good for Washington.
Yep, they look good, and they get an extra day rest going into next week. But let's turn the calendar to Saturday, Joe. We've got big noon kickoff in Champaign. The number 1 Ohio State Buckeyes go and play then number 17 Illinois. And Buckeyes sort of asserted their will on this one early. Didn't really seem like this game was as close as the score might indicate, but Ohio State got up early. They took the life out of the crowd, and they cruised to a double-digit victory.
In a way, Sean, I know it was a 34-point effort from Ohio State. This kind of felt like the old Jim Tressel days where, the defense kind of would just tease you, that you get a little leeway on them, and then they just completely shut you down. And then an opportunistic offense, and especially an opportunistic defense too, 2 fumble recoveries. So I think this is a team that just plays solid football. And that's not to criticize Ohio State. With the talent of their roster, solid football is going to get them to 12-0 with the remainder of their schedule, especially the way some of their future opponents have looked in the early stages of October. I don't think the offense has shown anything crazy yet. And frankly, I don't think Ohio State's quite been pushed to their maximum effort, even against Texas. And I know Texas beat Oklahoma, but I still am skeptical if that even will be Ohio State's best opponent all year. So I look at this team, and I look at kind of the clinical way they're taking care of games, kind of forcing the other quarterback, Luke Altmaier, who's a fine quarterback, to become Superman. I think Ohio State's going to be extremely hard to beat, and that's something we've known most of the year. But I think there's just the defense, the security blanket the defense provides is continuing to allow the offense to experiment with new things and to develop on their own. And mark my words, Sean, by November, I think this offense will be clicking on all cylinders, if it's not already, because they haven't had to show anything.
It doesn't seem to me that they're ever going to lose a game where they're more talented than the other team, and that is probably all but 2 or 3 other teams. Like, they've taken care of business as they should have, but they've had 2 of the tougher road games in this conference, and they've won both of them pretty handily. So I think they just need to keep churning along, and like you said, it's unless something really really bad happens, they're going to be winning a lot more games before Indy. But Ohio State 34, Illinois 16. All right, Joe. 3:30 out west. It was Indiana going on the road to Oregon to play the number 3 ranked Ducks. It's the Hoosiers that get the win 30-20, a game where Oregon only managed 3 points and 40 yards from their offense in the second half, and the Hoosiers defense came to play, and their offense still was as clinical as it's been all year. But Joe, impressed with the Hoosiers in this one?
Uh, More than impressed, shot. I think my favorite thing about Indiana, to be completely honest with you, is what they made Dante Moore do. And I think Dante Moore's still a fine quarterback. I think clearly his worst game in a Duck uniform. He looked so uncomfortable the entire second half. I think you saw remnants of it in the first half, and I think Indiana completely maintained control in the second half. A shot. I'm gonna mainly let you comment on this game because I mainly watched some of the other 3:30 games and was paying attention to the noon games. One thing I'll tell you is Bryant Haynes and I believe Mike Shanahan's the offensive coordinator for Indiana. Those are two guys that are gonna pop up in head coaching searches. Maybe not the most prominent your potential Floridas or Arkansas, Penn States of the world. They're going to pop up in other searches, though, either this year or next year. So that's just one greater college football Big Ten thing to keep an eye on. But Sean, I want mainly you to comment on the game as a lifelong Hoosier fan.
Yeah, the defense was a little bit different in this one. I think last year their defense was solid, but they sort of played let's keep them in front, let's not get torched, and let's trust our offense. But this defense is really, really good. The pressure on the quarterback that they had, and I want to give credit to the offensive line too, because Oregon has 2 pass rushers that will be drafted in the first round. I think they had 1 sack on Mendoza all game. So Indiana won in the trenches. Um, their base zone defense works if the quarterback doesn't have a lot of time, and there was nothing fluky about this one. Indiana just absolutely dominated them, and I don't think any of us saw that coming. But Mendoza's looked really good. The running game for Indiana, which probably has been, I mean, they're just really good at everything. I don't know if they're elite at anything, but they're really good at everything. The running game looked good. The wide receivers looked good. The defense, special teams, kicking, everything was pretty solid. And they end up winning this one by 10. But we talked about it last year, Joe, coming into this year. Signetti had come into these games playing a little bit too safe, and I thought it was Lanning that was too safe in this one. There was a 4th and 3 or 2, I think, when it was 13-10 Indiana in the red zone. Instead of trying to go and score, he took the points, and they never got the ball back, tied or down, or a chance to take the lead. So Oregon had the play. They had the pick 6 that you thought, all right, Oregon's probably going to win this game now after they tied it at 20. But Indiana took it right back and went down the field and scored. So a real big moment for the Hoosiers. And Joe, based on what's ahead for Indiana, there's a really good argument that their 3 toughest Big Ten games have already happened with the state of some of these teams going forward. So now that Indiana has the win over Oregon, how likely do you think a trip to Indy is for the Big Ten championship?
I think we're on a collision course, barring anything disastrous for Indiana and Ohio State. I think it's going to be Hoosiers' debut in their in the in Lucas Oil against the Buckeyes. I think it's probably long overdue. I know Purdue had their shot in 2022, and I think the year 2025 is going to be the first year the Hoosiers will be playing in Lucas Oil. I don't. I think they could even drop the Penn State game with the tiebreaker with Oregon.
Yep.
I think they'd be fine unless like Ohio State lost. We'll get into that later. It's not going to matter for the next few weeks. But really good on Indiana. And Sean, I'm going to just say this. It's a clear step up from last year's team.
Yes. And I think people sort of said that coming into the year, me included, like this team is better than last year. But the schedule was tougher, and it turns out that two of the tough away games. Well, they won one of them already, and then the second one here in a couple weeks doesn't look so tough. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, and you said it before. Indiana will likely have to lose two games not to make it, even if they do lose one. Um, but Oregon still has to play, a couple good teams. So maybe
At
even,
Washington, at
yeah,
Iowa.
and then Ohio State too. They'd have to two teams would have to jump them, but one week at a
Yeah.
time. But Indiana really, for the first time in the Signetti era, I think is really starting to be taken seriously by sort of the national public. But and for Oregon, Joe, I don't think they played terrible in this game.
No.
I just thought that like it they got Indiana to third down sort of a lot, and Indiana didn't even convert at a great rate. But I think you just chalked this one up to I think Indiana's the better team, which is not really how I saw this one going.
Not at all, Sean.
All right, Joe, let's move to the third primetime game of the day, and unfortunately, it includes your Michigan Wolverines. USC 31, Michigan 13. USC's offense has been really good all season, and it didn't stop here. Michigan just couldn't really hang in a shootout like we thought, and then of course Justice Haynes goes down as well, the Michigan running back. So as good as USC did in this game, I think a lot of the headlines are going to be unfortunately pointed towards your Wolverines.
Yeah, Sean, in terms of primetime embarrassments, this was probably the worst one since I want to say 2017, like at night, 2017 Penn State. Now, the Oklahoma game could have been a lot uglier had Oklahoma converted on their opportunities. Thankfully for Michigan, they did. This was a butt kicking right after Michigan tied it up 7-7. You know, we always talk about how Michigan has to start well in these games. In all three of them, luckily, the Nebraska one they got, and all three of them, the other team drives right down the field and scores. It even happened in the Wisconsin game. That's four of your. That's 4 for 4 on conference and Power Four opponents who've gone right down the field and got into the end zone or 5 yards from the end zone. I know there's scripted drives. I know those teams practiced those since July, but 4 of 4, that's a clear pattern. That's not correlation, and that's directly leading to Michigan playing off their game. I mean, the fact Bryce Underwood in three of Michigan's games without seeing the field is already down 7-0 is completely unacceptable with the talent personnel on defense. I do want to give USC's coaching their flowers. I know Lincoln Riley's been one of the most heavily scrutinized coaches ever since that Pac-12 title game loss to Utah. I think they had it perfect. I think they give Michigan limited possessions, and Michigan's young offense, they need as many possessions as possible for probability of scoring. I think they completely limited that. I think they threw Michigan off their game a lot. You figured Michigan was going to run a lot in this game. I think they stacked the box well enough. I think they confused Underwood a lot, and they kind of made Underwood. Uh, they made Underwood panic a lot. He took a sack that cost Michigan about 3 points in the first quarter. I mean, sorry, at the beginning of the second quarter. He threw the interception late, and in terms of the USC offense, I think they made Michigan miss so many tackles, and Michigan missed the tackles, but USC's also the ones. King Miller. 49-yard conversion on 3rd and 26. To me, that was the end of the game. I think that was backbreaking for Michigan. I think had it been 14-7 and Michigan got the ball back, we could have had a different story. It really doesn't matter, Sean. USC is clearly the better team, was clearly the better team Saturday night. And, should they win in South Bend or win one of these two big road games against Notre Dame or Oregon, I think they're a for real college football playoff contender. So, really good use of the bye week by Lincoln Riley and the Trojans, a really good game plan. And nothing else about this game was shocking. USC's receivers are good. Jada Maeva is good. And I think they outclassed Michigan in all three phases of the game. And the fourth phase coaching was a complete bully ball. I think they pretty much stuffed Sherrod Moore and the entire Michigan staff in a locker.
Yeah, coaching was the biggest part of this for me. It's not as if Michigan didn't come ready to play. Maybe the defense didn't, but they hung in there early. They had a nice touchdown drive to tie it at 7, but they immediately gave it right back up. And, once it got into the second half, this was a game that USC just outclassed them, which I don't really think that we saw coming. But Michigan definitely has got to go back to the drawing board. And USC, Joe, they're looking like they've taken that step from last year. And in terms for them, like you said, playoff. Well, how about for Notre Dame? USC being good helps Notre Dame a lot too, because Notre Dame already has two losses, needs a sort of big win to get in there. We'll talk about that in our projections video, which will come out um, on Wednesday. But things USC we've got sort of pushing up into that 4 through 7 range in this Big Ten, and we'll see where we go from there. All right, Joe, we got a couple of games left. This time we're going to go to Lansing, UCLA, coming off of the one of the biggest upsets in college football history. They did not skip a beat. Bruins 38, Spartans 13. Nico and Jerry Neuheisel's offense continues to score a lot of points. They punched Michigan State in the mouth and kind of just rolled from there. But what another impressive performance by the Bruins.
Yeah, I'm going to give UCLA their flowers first, and then kind of examine Michigan State because I think we're going to have to talk about a greater storyline. And I don't want to ramble too much because I know this pod's going to be so long, and I think we're going to do a separate video about some other coaching searches. But I didn't even think Nico played that well, Sean. QBR 50, 53. I think he made some bad decisions, but 16 to 24, 180 yards. The key factor is 3 TDs, no interceptions. He did a really good job protecting the football. UCLA, I think Jalen Berger's the only one who kind of lost the ball. And to me, Berger and Javian Thomas were their best players. Jalen Berger revenge tour is alive and well. The former Spartan, I guess, for all of a year. I thought he played really well. I think Coach Neuheisel called another great game. He's so good at spreading the ball. If you look at UCLA's receptions, no more than 3 receptions for each of their guys, but um, they had 5 guys with at least 2 receptions, and then spread the ball out amongst I believe 3, 6, 8 different targets. So I think that's really impressive. They're getting everyone involved, and then defensively, they completely made Aiden Childs and Alessio look ridiculous. I thought Brian Lindgren, the Michigan State offensive coordinator, called a very poor game. I really don't think that they could have gotten Mekhi Frazier going at all. And the fact Nick Marsh, 7 receptions, 77 yards, and the next leading receivers 23 yards, I think that kind of speaks for itself. Michigan State, uh, after scoring the first TD, you figure, all right, business as usual. After that, they were completely hapless. They couldn't move the ball much. They had trouble with ball security, trouble with the offensive line. Um, to me, if you didn't tell me anything about the year and you said one of these teams was 1-4, I would have pointed right to Michigan State.
The and this game was 38-7 until a garbage time touchdown pretty late. But I think UCLA's offense is just pretty good. Like they share the rock, they move it around, and Nico's ability to run the ball is really causing some problems here. Um, but I didn't really expect this from their defense. Spartans' offense has looked all right at times this year, but obviously Childs goes down. I believe it was a concussion, so we'll have to see his availability coming up next week. These are actually Indiana's next 2 opponents, Michigan State then UCLA. But Joe, UCLA still does control their own destiny for the college football playoff, believe it or not. If they do win out, they will be going to Indianapolis, and then, of course, if you win that, you are automatically in the playoffs. So how much longer do you think this magical run can last from UCLA?
Um, I don't know if it's going to be that magical. I certainly think that they could beat Maryland. I believe they're a 3.5 or 4.5 point favorite as we shoot this today. So I think this is a team that could go from 0-4 to perhaps a 5-7 or 6-6, which I think would be amazing considering the circumstances. On the dimmer side of things for the Spartans, I think the cries of a new coach, you kind of heard it like after USC. I thought that was pretty ridiculous just because USC was clearly the better team and it was an 11 p.m. start time. Even Nebraska, I thought, Michigan State just missed some opportunities. I didn't think it was a coaching thing. I think this effort was a direct indictment on the culture. Now, I am not saying they need to make a coaching change. I want to make that very clear. But there are prominent Spartan media, Spartan alumni, and frankly, Spartan players based on their efforts Saturday. And I'm not saying general, like, trying. I know they want to do well. I'm just talking more like, let's face it, it's pretty lifeless if you lose to a 2-4 team like that, homecoming wise. I think that's a very poor look for the program, a program that's looking very likely to miss their 4th straight bowl game. So a lot of questions are going to be had. I can't emphasize how important that Michigan game is for Jonathan Smith, barring a colossal upset of what's going to be the number two or three Hoosiers. Uh, I don't see. I don't see a lifeline for him aside from that Michigan game. So definitely big 2 weeks ahead for the Spartans. I do hope Aiden Childs is healthy. I think he makes that team a lot more exciting because let's face it, Sean, that defense has regressed from last year even.
And they just we talked about it coming in like, okay, you lose on the road to two teams that are better than you. So what? You got a chance at home against a team that you're better than to win, and they get smoked. Just I think the idea is starting to creep into their heads that maybe a change might be necessary, and usually that'll happen where he'll enter next season with a all right, it's time to go, and then he would be fired after next season. But I think just the thought is starting to become a little bit more possible. And Joe, why don't we transition into the next game, which did result in a coaching firing, and that'll be a separate video. But let's focus on the game here.
Yep.
Northwestern 22, Penn State 21. One of the biggest and quickest collapses I think we have seen in our lifetimes from a college football team. 3-0 3 weeks ago with a lead in overtime against Oregon at the whiteout. And today they're 3-3, 0-3 in the Big Ten with losses to UCLA and Northwestern. Joe, we coming into this one, we said, all right, if Penn State plays like they did at UCLA, they probably win against Northwestern because the Wildcats don't have that offensive firepower. They had just enough, 22 points. Penn State's offense looks really, really lifeless until they started to push it a little bit in the second quarter. And then Drew Aller goes down, and we learn that he is going to be out for the rest of the season. So congrats to Northwestern picking up a really big win, but it has unfortunately gone from rock bottom to below rock bottom for Penn State.
Yeah, I want to give credit first to Northwestern because we aren't going to eviscerate Penn State, unfortunately, for Nittany Lion fans. And I would feel bad, but they've kind of been doing it the last 3 weeks themselves. So I'm not doing anything different than they are. Uh, Preston Stone, really solid game. Good job protecting the ball. Griffin Wild, kind of out of nowhere. Um, Good on him. I thought Preston Stone, the TD throw he made to him in the second quarter was a thing of beauty. And I think Northwestern just kind of played a Pat Fitzgerald. I know I'm probably not allowed to say that. Pat Fitzgerald-esque game. You know, solid offensively, just moving the ball. I think their goal was just get two first downs each drive, play the field position battle, and play really, really solid defense. And I think they kind of allowed Penn State to cannibalize themselves. Now, as we're talking about cannibalize themselves, I think Penn State's defense to me was more the story of this game. I think Northwestern, the fact that um, the fact that they got three field goals and then I think two TDs, was that it, Sean?
Seems like it, yeah. Or
Yeah.
one TD and 5 field goals.
Yeah, one TD, five field goals, apologies. Um, the fact that's what it came down to indicates to me that this team moved the and from watching it, this team moved the ball like crazy out of Jim Knowles' defense. And I was really curious, so I kind of asked around our sources. Uh, with Andy Kotelnicki's kind of gimmicky offense, and I'm
So
not going to say the
it
guy
was it
can't
was
coach.
2 and 4, Joe. 2 touchdowns,
Yeah,
four field
sorry.
goals. Yep.
Yeah, so with Andy Kotelnicki's kind of gimmicky offense, one thing I really didn't like seeing or hearing was that the defense in the offseason had to adjust, and that's exactly what happened. Jim Knowles' defense, notoriously, if you looked at the 2022 Ohio State Buckeyes defense, his first year there, it was very hard to get a grasp on it. And I think that's why Michigan and Georgia absolutely like ran through and like got like consecutive 60 to 75-yard bombs on them. 23 to 24 Ohio State. You could clearly tell that defense was much, much better and uh, much more, let's call it knowledgeable about the system. This year, it looks like Knowles had to simplify the defense. And I heard the prime reason, Sean, was in training camp, the offense kind of had a lot of exceptions because the Penn State Andy Kotelnicki offense, part of the reason it was successful last year, it's so gimmicky and so unique. But when you're playing that in training camp every day, you're going to have to make exceptions. And I think, unfortunately for Coach Knowles, he's not fully running his defense, not only because the players don't quite grasp it yet, but also because he's had to make a lot of adjustments. So I do feel a great amount of sympathy for him and the Penn State personnel there. But let's call it what it is, Sean. This was a program failure of a game. Uh, they've lost two consecutive games where they are clearly the more talented, more experienced, and frankly, pedigree-wise, a way better coaching staff than the other two programs. So, Northwestern, on the bright side for you, I think bowl eligibility is more than possible. I know they have some really tough games coming up, but I think, Purdue, Minnesota are winnable. And then if you pick someone off, you're looking at 7 wins for the regular season. And Penn State, I almost can't believe I'm saying this, Sean. I think Ethan Gruckmeyer's a fine quarterback. I think should have been probably a higher 4 or 5 star out of high school from Columbus. It's just he was outshined by a lot of other guys in that QB class, which, by the way, but getting back on track here, Sean, it's Penn State whose bowl eligibility is more in doubt than Northwestern's. And if you told me that at the beginning of the year, I was very skeptical of Penn State from the beginning as a national title contender. As a bowl contender, I probably would have drug tested you.
And they're more than likely, Joe, going to be 3-6, which leaves them zero room for error. They've got at Iowa next week, which I believe is a night game.
It is, yeah.
Columbus, and then hosting the Hoosiers. So, if I had to guess right now, they're underdogs in all three of those games, and I think they lose them all. They lose all three, but I think Grunkmeyer for Aller wasn't great this year. Like, I don't know if that's really a downgrade at this point.
No.
And Aller will be going to the NFL and all that, but yeah, it seems like Penn State is just going to be sort of going through the motions the rest of the way. James Franklin was fired on Sunday after this game, and go to our other video on Penn State and what they're going to do there for that. All right, Joe, we've got a few games left. Nebraska going on the road to Maryland, and Dylan Raiola and the Cornhuskers get the job done 34-31. A little bit of a back and forth one here. Coming in, we thought that Maryland just couldn't really hang with Nebraska, and for 3 quarters, that was not true. They were winning by 7 going into the fourth, but a clinical fourth quarter, and the Cornhuskers won 10-0. They get out of there with a win. Raiola does throw 3 interceptions, but 4 touchdowns on top of it, and they have a really solid running attack. We said Dylan Raiola probably had to stink a little bit for this game to Maryland to win, and he did, and Nebraska still gets away with it. The Cornhuskers are 5-1 right now, with a win against Cincinnati that's aging pretty well, with a road win here against Maryland. There are some commenters who weren't too happy with them not being in the top 25, Joe, but it seems like Nebraska's also taken a step from last year. I think they probably lose this one last year.
I completely agree, Sean. To me, this was Dylan Raiola's Jameis Winston on the on the Bucks or Saints game.
If you're better than the other team, that's enough.
Yeah, and that's enough. And Emmett Johnson to me was the MVP of this game. I know he didn't find the end zone, at all. The rushing attack early, you could tell Maryland did not account that he would kind of go off that way. The 50-yard long run, and Isaiah Hunter, the 64-yard TD, 2 TDs on the day for him. Dane Key. This Nebraska offense shot, we said it all year. After the Cincinnati game, I was skeptical, but the rest of the year, this has been a very fun offense to watch, even in that loss to Michigan. I think when you give Dylan Raiola ample protection, he's got a gunsling. Now, in this game, you clearly saw the problems with the interceptions, but if you have the running game too, I find it hard. I'm hard pressed to believe Nebraska can't score 30 in the rest of their games. And you look at their schedule here. There's not a defense on here that necessarily intimidates me. I know USC's just shut down Michigan, but let's face it, they haven't proved me anything on the road quite yet. And I'm gonna be honest with you, Sean. Nebraska has an outside shot at going 10-2 and maybe sneaking into the playoff. I think there's a very good chance they could go. There's a possibility they could go 11-1 as well, which will punch their ticket. So Nebraska, I think you take it game by game because I think at Minnesota will present its own unique challenges. But if you figure out that defense, and I think Malik Washington's a great quarterback. I thought he also played a fine game for Maryland. I don't think you're going to play much better quarterbacks than that aside from Jada Maeva. So for Nebraska, I think you fix up the defense, you fix some flaws, you fix the run D to the best you can, because I know that's just going to be a flaw. You are what you are. And perhaps there's a huge jump in year three of Matt Rule. Something after the Michigan game we were a little skeptical of, but they've taken care of business ever since. So really good for the Huskers. And for Maryland, I still think they are what they are. I think they're a great offensive team. I think even in spite of the three interceptions, giving up the 34 points, your run defense getting gashed the way it did. Um, I think, you're probably a 6-7 win team, which is still better than I thought you would be.
Yep.
So I learned a lot from this game. I learned Nebraska could play really, really risky and still win. So good on the Huskers.
Yeah, and for them, that Cincinnati win is aging nicely. That's probably going to be their best win, um, other than maybe USC. But, they have Penn State, UCLA away. Who knows what those two teams are looking like then? And then they host Iowa. So the path is there, and they just got to be a little bit more consistent in this game because this effort is probably not enough against USC and maybe not even UCLA or Penn State. But we'll see what happens when we get there. All right, Joe, we got 2 games left. First one is Iowa 37, Wisconsin 0. Mark Gronowski and the Hawkeyes put Wisconsin in the ground on the road, too. It was a tough scene there at Camp Randall up in Madison. Kamari Moulton starts to look a little better as he was a little injured early on. Nearly 100 yards, a touchdown. But Iowa just totally dominated this game. We thought that there was a chance that they could score a lot of points here, and that's exactly what they did. Obviously, a really tough situation there for Wisconsin, wondering if maybe this will be another vacancy here soon. But the story for me here is that Iowa's offense can score a lot of points if needed.
Yeah, Sean, I wouldn't go that far in Iowa. And by the way, that's not to discredit them. I did not account. I picked Wisconsin to win. Freezing cold, freezing cold take by me. Uh, Aside from the Clemson picks early in the year, but we don't need to rehash
Yeah, but
those.
plenty of people picked that, so.
Yeah, but no, Mark Gronowski, I don't think played all that well, to be honest with you. I thought their running game kind of,
Well, he was part of that, too.
yeah, but like passing wise, I wasn't too impressed. I think Wisconsin kind of just hung themselves in this game,
Yep.
Sean,
Yep.
to get blown out. I think had they not made the mistakes, this could have been like a 27-10 type game. This thrashing was completely unacceptable. They floated out Hunter Simmons, barely able to walk Billy Edwards and a Danny O'Neal, and it's very clear. I think the story of the Fickle era so far is they haven't had a consistent quarterback. You had Tanner Mordecai get injured. You had Evers get injured. You had Mordecai get injured. You had Van Dyke get injured. You had Billy Edwards get injured. I think a lot of Luke Fickle's problems there have been his own doing. For example, hiring Coach Longo to run a non-traditional air raid system there. But it's also been a lot of bad luck with injuries too. So I don't want to make this case that Luke Fickle's a terrible coach because I think if he went to another program, like similar to a Cincinnati caliber, like let's just say, maybe he went to an Oklahoma State or right back to Cincinnati, I think he'd be very successful. So I think there's probably more to this story about why Wisconsin's struggling as a program. But in this game, it's clear they can't take care of the ball. They they can't protect the quarterback, and they have no offensive momentum whatsoever. And outside of that drive at Michigan, Sean, their last 2 games, they've scored 0 TDs.
Yep. That's just an unfortunate situation, sort of all around. A little bit of luck of their own making, like you said, but to me, this was the writing on the wall. They can ride out the end of the year with Fickle, but I think that this is where they'll make the decision that they're going to go somewhere else. And considering what happened at State College, Joe, like, do you think they fire Fickle so they can get Franklin on the phone? Like, I think that would be a really good hire for them if there is a vacancy.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that more in a video we're going to post later this week, Sean, because Wisconsin, Michigan State, and maybe one more team this conference might open up. So I'd rather discuss that there. One thing I will say, though, Sean, is Camp Randall was packed at the beginning of this game, hopeful. And to me, it kind of gave me flashbacks of 2014 Michigan, seeing that place clear out. I'm hard-pressed to believe that their next home game against Ohio State isn't going to be like, I don't know, let's call it
Could be
50,
worse.
50.
Could be worse than this one from a game
not
point of view.
not only game
Yeah.
point of view, but crowd point of view too. And let's face it, that does matter in college
Oh
football.
yeah, for sure. That'll get the people's attention because those in charge, they will be there and they'll see how many empty seats there are. All right, Joe, we got one more game here. Up north, Minnesota 27, Purdue 20. A game that the Boilers were not necessarily in control of, but it looked like they were going to have a serious chance to pick up their first Big Ten win, and a nice fourth quarter with 2 touchdowns in the Golden Gophers. They get past this one by a touchdown. But Joe, Minnesota 4-2. Think that they're in the middle of the pack, and Purdue is continuing to battle, but just not going to happen really in year one.
Yeah, like I said, I made the prediction Purdue's going to get somebody they shouldn't. I think this game reinforced it because they were damn close.
Yeah,
I thought they did a phenomenal job shutting down the running game. After a while, Minnesota stopped trying. Unfortunately, Darius Taylor could still hurt you in the passing game, and that 40-yard reception and the other dink and dunks kind of was indicative of that. I thought this was one of Drake Lindsey's better games. Now you look at the QBR and you probably roll your eyes, and I know you look at the 21 to 45, you roll your eyes. He was their only option on offense. Let's call it what it is. Um, I think Ryan Brown didn't cost Purdue the game, but he definitely needed to play a lot better than he did. 21 of 40, 0 TDs, 2 picks. I think he's still a young quarterback. I think he'll get better. Devin Mockabee continues to be one of the better underrated backs, I think, in all of America, certainly in this
yeah.
conference. So I think Purdue, they just need a more consistent effort in games like this because Minnesota is a better team. They were at home. But if Ryan Brown plays a better game, I venture to think Purdue wins. And you look at their remaining games, aside from Ohio State and Indiana, maybe a Washington. I think if they play well enough, they could be in those games like they were in this one in the fourth quarter. And I think with a more complete passing performance and if they continue to shut down the run, especially against, for example, a Michigan, they could be in these games and I think they'll upset someone, Sean. It's inevitable.
I think their next 2 games they could certainly win, Northwestern and Rutgers, and there is a serious change from last year. I think their offense is sort of fun to watch. They do some trick plays, and other people, other than the quarterback, throwing the ball. So, and they just went down really easy last year, and they're just not doing that this year. I think they, you know, if Indiana is going to West Lafayette with absolutely nothing on the line in week 12 or in the final week of the season, Joe, that's gonna be a really scary one because Purdue really doesn't have much to look forward to the rest of the way other than that one. But if they get, say, Purdue's on 5 wins going into that one and Indiana's going to Indy no matter what, like that might be a really, really dangerous game for the Hoosiers. But Purdue is, I know they have 8 returning players from last year, but being that your quarterback and your top skill player are one of those returners, those players have improved tremendously from last year. Brown was a bad quarterback, and Maccabee was a okay player on a bad team. They have now improved. So I think hope for the future for Purdue is that it might be a little bit of a slow build, but I think they are on the right track in year one, which is a little bit different than many people thought. But that's going to be it, Joe, for our Week 7 recap. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.